live. Good afternoon and welcome to today's ad hoc scrutiny panel meeting on residential housing stock, health and safety compliance. We have two apologies, Kevin McAllister and Councillor Uppal for today. I wonder if members of the panel would like to introduce themselves, please. We'll go around from my pictures. Councillor Pinnock.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Councillor Amanda Pinnock. I'm councillor for the Ashbrow ward and committee member on this ad hoc committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Richards.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Susan Lee Richards from the Newsom ward.
Linda.
Good afternoon. My name's Linda Summers and I'm a co-optee on the panel.
Councillor Smith.
Councillor Anthony Smith from the Lindley ward.
Thank you very much, and I'm Councillor Liz May, chair of the panel. Minutes of previous meeting from the 21st of September are here for approval. Do we agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Yes, thank you. Are there any matters any of the committees wish to raise from those minutes at this time? No? Okay, thank you. Are there any interests that anyone needs to declare? No? No. Okay. And all items are in public this afternoon. We haven't received any deputations or petitions or any public questions. The terms of reference are in the pack for information. And so this brings us to the items for discussion. Now, item 9, the Fire Safety Champions update. I've agreed for this to go first because the officer who's giving this report needs to leave the meeting during the time we'll be having the discussions. So, Michelle, do you want to come in? Is it Naz or Michelle that's going to start off? And can you introduce yourselves, please, when you're beginning to speak? Thank you.
It'll be Michelle, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Smage. So I'm Michelle Anderson-Daw. I'm Head of Partnerships for Homes and Neighbourhoods, and part of my portfolio is tenant engagement. So I've been asked today to update the panel on our fire safety champions. We're aiming to have fire safety champions who are residents, tenants or leaseholders in all what we consider to be council high-rise, high-risk residential buildings, a bit of a mouthful. So that just means our high-rise buildings, our 6-storey buildings and our retirement living schemes. So fire safety champions support the council's commitments to involve residents and the key role they can play to help the council make our buildings a safer place to live. The champions respond to key objectives that are set out in our what we call a resident engagement framework for fire safety, and that forms part of our overall fire safety management plan. And key areas are having a range of methods in place that allow tenants and residents to get involved, to think about including less formal approaches that encourage more people to play their part in fire safety, and not just focusing on our more traditional or recognised groups, such as our tenant and residents associations. So fire safety champions respond to those objectives. As I've said earlier, a fire safety champion is a tenant or leaseholder, and they're able to represent the views of all residents and fire safety in the building that they live. And they are supporting us to develop that culture where residents understand the important role that they play in fire safety. So specific duties will include representing the block of flats on schemes where the champion lives. So it's focused very much on where they live, the place that they know. They can share information on our behalf relating to fire safety with other tenants and leaseholders, but that's two-way. They can also provide us with information about any concerns that tenants and leaseholders may have expressed. They can help to advise tenants and reinforce any key messages, anything that's on notice boards, anything that's in the newsletters that we produce for each building. and they can feed back any concerns that they may pick up as they go about their daily lives. We would like to encourage fire safety champions to take part in block inspections with housing officers to monitor communal areas and ensuring that they are kept safe. This isn't about fire safety champions being officers. This isn't about them taking on the role of officers. This is just about that supportive role that they can play and that key window that they have into the lives of tenants and any concerns they may have around fire safety. So the role of fire safety champions was developed over the summer with the support of our tenant advisory and grants panel. And our ambition is to recruit one champion to each of our priority buildings, which are 36 buildings in total. So we've started recruitment just after the summer. We've promoted the opportunities in both our high-rise and 6-storey buildings, which are our priority. We have newsletters for those buildings and we've promoted it in those newsletters. We've also hand-delivered flyers to all residents in the high-rise and 6-storey blocks. To date, we have 3 fire safety champions who have been recruited. They are all from 6-storey blocks, so we've not yet recruited any in the high-rise. But this month, they will be inducted this month. An induction will include raising awareness of fire safety and what we mean, the expectations of champions, the support that's available, and address any specific needs they may need to enable them to carry out this important role. We also have a further 20 potential fire safety champions, and the fire safety engagement team are currently, having discussions with them, and they were identified from earlier engagement activities. So any engagement activities that we carry out, we always take advantage of the opportunity to try and encourage tenants to get involved in more activities as part of our wider menu of tenant involvement. So that's where we are currently, but the work continues. The recruitment of fire safety champions won't stop. It will be an ongoing process. I'll stop there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any questions if people would like to raise their hands? Councillor Pinnock.
Sorry, I was just struggling to find my unmute button there. It sounds absolutely fabulous, actually. It sounds like a really great opportunity for that champion to be the go-between between the council and the residents. And I've sort of done myself some notes. So I was asking about selection, so I know you sort of covered that. But what I was interested to know is, although this fire safety champion will feed back, for example, to the residents about things that are going on and be that conduit with the council, how's that fire safety person going to engage with residents in the block or the area that they sort of represent?
The fire safety champions.
Champions.
Yeah.
And what sort of environment or what sort of platform will the council support them with in which to do that? Because you talk a lot about, there'll be information sharing, providing information and those sorts of things, opportunity to feedback. But I'm thinking, if I was a resident living in the block, how would I be encouraged then to engage with that fire safety champion? Yeah. And for that information then to be relayed to the council?
Really good questions, Councillor Pinnock. I mean, first, what we're going to do, we've got a fire safety engagement team who literally patrol the block on a daily basis. They're very visible now that we can be out and about. The fire safety champions will literally do the same because they have to be known. We can't assume that they know everybody in the blocks. So they will do a lot of that, just literally patrolling the blocks, outside the blocks, whether it be with the fire safety engagement team, with the housing officers. So the first priority is to get them known and comfortable with doing that. They've also got to then be individuals who want to engage and find that quite easy. So that's going to be part of the support and part of the induction, whether it be scenario settings, etc. So it will be, because you're going to have to be somebody who's quite nosy, and I don't say that in a negative way. You're going to have to want to know what's going on. You're going to have that interest. You're going to have to challenge us, so that to make sure that what we're saying as part of our newsletters, as part of our letters around fire safety, makes sense, and challenges and question what we're saying in order to then relay that message. This doesn't replace anything formal. it's just another way of encouraging key messages to get to tenants and from tenants and leaseholders back to us, because some people may prefer to speak to their peer, a tenant, or they may prefer to speak to us. So it will only ever be reinforcing key messages. It doesn't replace anything. So that's the approach that we're intending to take to get them familiar. We will be introducing them in the newsletters. We will continue to promote them as part of anything that we're doing. And that was very key to the Tenant Advisory and Grants panel, that we help the champions become familiar, become known, and that the support to them is a continuous thing and not something that we just do for the beginning. So we're really trying to take that on board. So the tenant and tenant panel had the same views as yourself, Councillor Pinnock.
Linda?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Michelle. It was very useful. Just a quick query really about the high-rise blocks where at the moment you haven't recruited anybody. Have you identified a need to do the same functions that a champion would do through some other way if you're not able to recruit them in some blocks?
Well, what we're going to do at the moment, we do have, sorry, my doorbell's going, sorry, apologies, it's just typical. What we do have is we have, we're going to start and try and get a champion per block. But we do have other tenants. We do have tenants at TRAs. We do have street voices, individual tenants. And if we have to rely on them as backups, we will do. The Tenant Advisory and Grants panel have also said we're happy to look at fulfilling that role on an interim if we need to. So we will use that as a backup, but the ideal is to have tenants who live in those blocks. That's the ideal.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask about retirement living schemes,
Yes.
please? Because one of your comments was that it doesn't replace what an officer would do. Now, so I'm interested to know how you're going to be recruiting a fire safety champion in the retirement living schemes, where traditionally there was a scheme coordinator for those schemes, and whose part of their role was the health and safety compliance. So how does that work in retirement living schemes?
We're going to start next year looking at the retirement living schemes. First, we still have independent living officers in all of the retirement living schemes, and that continues. This does not replace that. In a similar way to the high-rise and the six-storey blocks, we would expect the champions to technically walk the same route as the independent living officers to get themselves familiar. They're not replacing that work. That's formal. That has to stay in place. They are just going to reinforce the messages that the independent living officers provide, that we provide centrally through homes and neighbourhoods around fire safety and other areas of compliance. They are just there 24/7. So they may pick up conversations. We might send something out and think it's very clear, but a fire safety champion might be in the communal area and hear that people are questioning or don't quite understand. They can either help reinforce those messages or tell us you haven't got it right because people are still not understanding. So it's only ever an additional way of getting key messages across from tenants to us and from us to tenants. They'll just walk alongside independent living officers. That's the intention.
Okay, it's just my concern is there's a lot of vulnerable people.
Yes.
In those schemes, and you know that it could be difficult as well for somebody to be a fire safety champion.
Yes. Yeah.
So that brings me to my next question about conflict, because there could be, if somebody says, oh, you shouldn't have that under the staircase or whatever, and things like this in a block of flats or in any communal area, then there could be a little bit of conflict or tension. So how are you helping the fire safety champion role be able to cope or manage a situation?
What we've given, and it's going to come out in the first induction for the three that we've recruited, they are not there to enforce anything. That's our role, and we take that role seriously. If they spot something, they can tell us, but we would not expect them to enforce anything. They live there, they're a resident, and first and foremost, they're a resident. The vulnerability we take into account. This is a voluntary role. We have, as you'll be aware, Councillor Smage, in our retirement living schemes, we have some very able-bodied individuals, and we have some that are very frail. It would be down to the individuals, and even if an individual is keen but has an area of vulnerability, we would talk with them individually about what support they want from us if they're still keen and want to do it. We won't stop anybody, but we recognise it will be very much about individual support and what they feel they can do. They might just want to do one thing. They don't have to do the whole role. They might say, I'd like to get involved, but this is the bit I'd be interested in. And that's fine. So it's very flexible, because the main thing is really just anyone who wants to have that opportunity, but we recognise it is a supportive role.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Michelle on this item? No? I think it would be good to hear from tenants themselves what they feel about this, and we do have on the 22nd of December we have engagement strategy, which is to include input from tenants and housing advisory panel members, and I wonder if we'd like to hear from somebody as well about this role as well, and how people feel it. So we've got those voices, on people's experience. I think that would be good. Yes. Is that okay with the panel if we do that? Yeah. Okay.
That would be brilliant.
All right. Okay. Thank you ever so much, Michelle, for that then. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we move back to item 8, the role of the social housing regulator. Laz and Eric, over to you.
If I may just say some introductory remarks, Chair, and then Eric will take you through some of the detail. But this is a paper on the role of the regulator, as you just stated, but it's more focused on the regulatory standards that the regulator expects registered providers and their boards to adhere to. The board, in the context of the council, is the cabinet, but as advised by an expert panel of housing advisors that sits below that, to ensure that the tenant's voice is heard loud and clear through that decision-making process. So we have up to 6 tenant members on that. Currently, we have recruited 5 of those. But then also, you wanted, I think, at this session to be able to go through not just the standards and what they say and what they expect, but how Kirklees is faring against those, and in particular around health and safety. But just for the scrutiny panel's purpose, the 2 standards that the regulator currently has jurisdiction on in terms of council housing are the home standard and the consumer standard. That said, the white paper, although it has not become act as yet and is likely not to get primary legislation in place for at least 2/3 years when we talk to the regulator at the highest level. So whilst it's not enacted, the regulator's arm will be extended to reach into governance and value for money, but also the viability standard. To date, councils have not been subject to that in terms of regulation. So for today, probably the focus should be home standard and consumer standard, which is what we are regulated on, but with a keen eye to the future in terms of how we are gearing up for the other 2 when they do get introduced in 2/3 years. Eric, can I hand over to you, please? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. I won't read the paper out, Chair. I'm sure you've all had the ability to do that, but maybe just in summary to add to what Naz has said. Yeah, there are 2 principal standards, the economic set of standards and the consumer standards. From the point of view of the local authority, the economic standards, only the rent standard is actually applicable to us at this time, and those standards are proactively regulated. So actually we have to physically send regular returns back to the regulator for social housing on that particular standard, how we're implementing it, etc. But the consumer standards, which include the home standards and the tenant involvement and empowerment standard, which are probably the 2 key ones now from the white paper and the health and safety perspective, as you've heard Michelle talk earlier, post Grenfell, a lot came out that said tenants weren't being listened to. And that's one of absolutely the cornerstones that we are responding to at the moment, not just with these fire safety champions, but as Naz says, with our new governance structure, including the Housing Advisory Board with 6 tenant members. But we have the Tenant Advisory and Grant Panel that feeds into that from the point of view of further tenant involvement and engagement. And that's ably supported by the Housing Health and Safety Board and that framework, which again is in your pack. So from the point of view of post-Grenfell, obviously we feel we are alive to the sort of things that are going to happen. As Naz says, a lot of this will take primary legislation to enact. Certainly it won't be before 2023, particularly before significant changes are made. But we are anticipating, for example, that the regulatory standards will be revised, and the regulator has already indicated that there will be potentially some consultations along those lines coming out next year. We're certainly expecting the decent home standard to be revisited and to be updated in light of the Grenfell sort of tragedy, but also in line with the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. We certainly expect our regulator, the Regulator for Social Housing, to enter into a formal concordat with the Building Safety Regulator when that's fully up and running, in the same way that they have done with the Housing Ombudsman Service. So this will provide a triangulation of regulation for the regulator to look at. So feedback from tenants through the Housing Ombudsman Service, as well as any particular proactive regulation delivered by the Building Safety Regulator. And it's more likely that whereas the current consumer standards are only reactively regulated based on the passing of what's called a serious detriment test, that test possibly will fall away, and we'll see much more proactive regulation across all of the consumer regulatory standards in the future. So they're the kinds of things that we're already anticipating. As Naz has pointed out, it's the Cabinet that has ultimate responsibility as our RP board in our relationship, but our Housing Advisory Board is very much supporting Cabinet from the point of view of reviewing the performance of the service against the standards as set, because all of the standards have to be regulated in a co-regulatory approach. That means the RP itself has to say, we are testing ourselves against these standards, and we are satisfied that we are meeting those standards. And if we're not, we will bring that to your attention, Regulator of Social Housing, which is again clearly what we've done earlier on this year when we've identified the health and safety issues, particularly in the high-rise blocks. So with that in place, we feel that we have a new governance framework which is supportive of us from the point of view of reviewing and delivering those standards. We're minded for the changes that are likely to come over the next year or two, and we're already starting to put things in place to make sure we can respond to those changes when they're finally known to us. So I think with that said, Chair, I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Right, if the panel would like to indicate, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Eric. It was helpful. Can I just check, first of all, I've understood this co-regulatory approach. It sort of effectively puts as many responsibilities on the registered providers as it does on the regulator, effectively, because the ball's in your court to
absolutely
get compliance and to report any concerns against standards. So, right, so far as I can tell from the report, we've had sort of 2 routes into them on that. One in relation to the high-rise flats where you self-referred
yes,
the concern, and then generally as part of sharing with them ongoing information, they've raised some further queries as well. And I just wondered what the status of those 2 engagements, if you like, was, and whether that is indeed the extent of it for the moment, or whether there's anything else that you're in dialogue with them about.
No, they're the 2 things. I think Naz will want to come in. We have a meeting with the regulator planned next week to take this conversation forward. It is an open and transparent conversation. It has been ever since we first self-reported in February, and obviously all the way through the process we've been responding to their questions and thoughts to make sure that they're getting the comfort that we believe we can give them, and that's what we're hoping to be able to do in that meeting next week.
If I could add to that, Chair, so in answer to the question around what's the status, I think to date it's been a kind of a voluntary undertaking that we've referred ourselves to. I don't think it's any more formal than that as yet. Particularly around the high rise, they were pleased with the fact that we've self-referred ourselves and we're aware enough of our issues, and two, we're addressing the issues, so they were relaxed about our improvement plan. We have since sent them in terms of that ongoing relationship building, the broader compliance review that you have seen to enable us to continue to keep that openness and transparency going, and the kind of the co-regulatory piece being taken very seriously. That is a much broader review, as you are aware, and has to raise some issues around improvement that the service needs to address, which we are clearly addressing as well. And so that's kind of prompted further questions, as it would do, because it is comprehensive. There'll be legitimate questions for clarification at this stage. We're concerned, aren't we? So the regulator should be concerned too. Beyond that, I think what they'll do is go to a regulation panel, which is in essence a moderating panel for consistency of approach, and ensuring that the principles of co-regulation are being observed. But I think it will continue. It will be an ongoing dialogue now for some time, until all of us are satisfied that the programs are being delivered to time and at pace. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Lindy, did you want to come back at all? You're okay with that?
No, that was fine. That was a helpful response. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Can I just ask, you do mention that you've had some extensions due to delays in appointing a suitable contractor. Have those delays been sorted out now?
They have been. We've decided to take some of the high-rise work in-house and deliver it through the council's DLO. And the low-rise programme, in terms of the procurement of the fire safety works, we've now identified the contractor. We're now just going through the pre-contract services agreement with them, which we should have kind of got through the detail and agreed by late winter, early spring, so February, March time, and then the contractor will start getting on site to deliver the fire safety works on the low rise as well. So yes, all is now in hand, and we are confident that we will deliver to the new timetable that we shared with the regulator.
Okay, and the low rise, just remind us again what you mean by low rise.
It's 6-storey and below, isn't it?
6-storey and below. Okay, yes. I think it
which currently aren't in scope in terms of high-rise buildings at risk, or high-rise risk buildings. But we anticipate that once government have got into, and the regulator has got into a position where they feel that we now have, as a UK, have a handle on the high-rise issue, we suspect they'll then move into low-rise. So we're preparing for that now, so that we can ensure that we've got a head start on what the regulator may require. So we don't need a regulator to want to keep our tenants safe, do we, in that sense?
Yeah, it would be useful, I think, if we could, if that plan could be shared with the scrutiny panel, not your contractual, obviously, but the
program looks like
with the program. Yes. Sorry, Councillor Pinnock.
Can I say, Chair? But that is now, that's what the pre-contract services agreement will enable us to see. So it will be a while before we can share that with you, because we won't have it yet. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pinnock.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the Housing Advisory Board. So the way the report's written, it suggests that it's present tense, so they've already started to meet. Is that correct?
Indeed.
Yeah, I just wanted to know about regularity. So how regular are they likely to meet? And also about, I can see that, you know, you've got 6 tenants as part of the board. And I just wanted to know how representative those 6 tenants were of all the social housing in Kirklees. How are they selected? I'm just interested to know about sort of process.
Eric, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm mute, Eric. And I'm saying you're on mute, and I'm on mute.
It's got to happen. It's got to happen to me at least once. So apologies for that. Anyway, you heard everything I had to say. No. Yes, very, very early doors when we knew we were putting this into place. That's very early this year, in January, February time. We wrote out to all tenants, making them aware of the opportunities that were going to come up. We used our normal tenant newsletters, etc., to elicit some support. But in addition, we also decided to send a text message to every tenant when the opportunity became live. And that, I have to say, provided us with a fantastic response. We had more than 50 tenants come back and say, I'm now interested in finding out more about this. So we were able, Michelle's team and myself were able to have a conversation with the vast majority of those tenants who put applications in for the 6 places available. We did long list, I think it was 15, and obviously we looked at appointing 6. One of the 6 people we offered a position to, their circumstances changed, so had to withdraw at the last minute. That's why we've only got 5 of the 6 at the moment. But all of those people, very good profile from literally in their 20s to their late 50s, early 60s. There are 3 females and 2 males. 2 from ethnic minority backgrounds, etc. So we believe we have a reasonable representative group. And more interestingly, they are quite new as well. So they haven't come through lots of other tenant engagement mechanisms, etc. So they are really bringing us a new and fresh perspective. They first met together in early May after their recruitment. They did some induction training. They met with the other panel members, and they've had some training sessions since around finance and risk and some of the other things. And they've met 3 times formally to consider matters. At the moment, they meet bi-monthly, so every 2nd month. At our meeting in December, we said we would look at, when they've been operating for 6 months, undertaking a bit of a review to see if that was working well for them. And we already had some feedback around the way that we can present risk information, the way that they might want to get more into deep dives around the consumer standards, for example. So we have some suggestions to put to them in December around maybe a few more meetings in the year, but maybe more focused meetings around, specific single item topics, a little like today's meeting, to be honest. So they can really, delve deeply into one area of our business and make sure that they get the comfort from it. So that's the process that we've used. We also recruited 4 independent members, co-optees, that bring particular professional expertise around building safety, stock investment, these kinds of things, to help support and advise the panel, which is, as the paper says, is chaired by Cathy Scott, the portfolio holder, and is also supported by David Shepherd, the strategic director. So we do believe we have a good mix of people. There's certainly, from my perspective, and I've been involved in company secretarial work in governance for well over 20 years, they've gelled really well together, and I'm really hopeful that they're going to perform going forward. So we just need to give them the support and space to do so.
Naz, did you want to come in?
If I may, Chair, and just to add to what Eric is saying, and I think Eric and Michelle need to take the full credit for the recruitment process and the diverse tenant members that they have recruited to that. But what just in addition to what Eric has said, they are very high caliber. We were absolutely clear that what we didn't want is a tokenistic tenant voice sat on a board level something that really didn't engage. And we were trying to strengthen the voice so that it influenced cabinet decision making around homes and neighbours activity. And so they are both a diverse range, but they're a very highly skilled and highly qualified group of people, and they're not the usual type of suspect you would see on a kind of a housing board. As one of them's got a master's, one of them's got a degree, one of them's got a housing working in housing background. So they contribute, and they are, I think as their confidence and the gelling together grows, they will hold us to account to, and I think will positively influence cabinet decision making if we ensure we get the mechanisms right.
Okay,
and may
thanks.
I also add, it's not directly relevant for today, but one of those tenant board members has already put their name forward to the Association of Retained Council Housing Tenants body nationally. So for the first time, we'll have hopefully a representative if they're successful at that body.
That's good. Councillor Pinnock, did you want to come back at all?
No, I just think that's really fantastic to hear. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Lee Richards.
Thank you. It sounds like they're a really good board. How long are they in post for?
The normal term of office is for up to 6 years, 2 terms of 3 years. Obviously, one of the things we will look at, because everybody has started together and been recruited together, is we may have to look at some form of staggering of that after a year or two, so we don't end up with a cliff edge in 6 years' time where everybody finishes and everybody else starts. But obviously, there are things that we can manage over the next 2 to 3 years to put things in place.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth, you mentioned as well that they are holding you to account on the standards. And I wondered if you could share with us at some point what information is being shared with the Housing Advisory Board, so we can just see, get that assurance on the holding to account on the standards that the Housing Advisory Board are undertaking. Would that be possible, please?
Absolutely. We did a general review with them in July, which was literally only their second meeting. So obviously that was fairly early doors for them. But at that point, we did say that we wanted to look at having, and they said they wanted to have deep dives into each of the 4 standards separately and independently. And that's what we're planning at the moment, and some of the plans that we'll bring to them in December for next year. But that's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Richards.
Chair,
Oh, sorry.
Chair,
No.
if I may, and really when I was talking about the mechanism, getting the mechanism right, Eric and I have been discussing in the background in terms of board development of the governance arrangements, is identifying those decisions that are going to be key decisions, either through cabinet approval or through officer delegations, and ensure that the board are cited on those to make sure the tenant's voice is influencing cabinet decision making. So those will usually travel, because they're key decisions, through pre-cabinet scrutiny.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
But if I might add, we haven't got that process set up in the way the way we'd like it to be set up, if you see what I mean. So.
Yeah, that's fine.
We are on our own learning curve, I think, is the best way of putting it.
If you need any help, advice on the pre-decision scrutiny, you just let me know. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Linda.
Thank you. Just a quick query, really, on the board structure. Can you just help me understand how the Housing Advisory Board relates with the Building Safety Assurance Board? The diagram on the back page of the pack, and I appreciate these things are a bit simplistic when you draw them, but appears to suggest that the Assurance Board reports into the Housing Advisory Board. Is that how it works?
It does, but it's also a two-way process, because obviously the Housing Advisory Board, if it wanted to, so if there was a issue that came out of a deep dive and it thought there was a health and safety concern as rising from that issue, they could task the Building Safety Assurance Board to look into that on their behalf with that level of expertise and then report back to them. But again, the diagram tries to show that Building Safety Assurance Board for housing links with the corporate assurance board, and then obviously also goes up into the health and safety oversight board in the council, onto ET and into cabinet that way. So it's a two-pronged attack, if I can put it that way, where health and safety matters could take the route through the oversight board or through the housing advisory board, both of which might end up at cabinet or vice versa. So the Building Safety Assurance Board does report into the Housing Advisory Board. We have a regular item on the agenda for feedback because the Building Safety Assurance Board meets monthly, when, as I've said, the Advisory Board only meets bi-monthly at the moment. But we're making sure that those communication links are made and hopefully are as transparent and as supportive as possible.
Thank you.
Michelle, did you want to come in?
Thank you. It just follows on, just a point worth mentioning around the HAB, the Housing Advisory Board. We also, Eric and I worked with TPAS, the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, to ensure a level of transparency to the recruitment, and also to ensure good practice and current good practice. So I just think that's worth mentioning. And in relation to the Building Safety Advisory Board, TAG, the Tenant Advisory and Grants Panel, also have a regular place on the report. So anything that they want to escalate to the Building Safety Advisory Board in relation to tenant safety issues, there is a place for them on that board, just to make that clear. Thank you.
Okay, so just to get this in my head, because so the Tenant Advisory and Grant Panel can feed into the Housing Advisory Board, but they can also put safety concerns into the Building Safety Assurance Board. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah.
And that the Housing Advisory Board can ask the Building Safety Assurance Board to investigate something that they would like investigating, and the Building Safety Assurance Board reports to the Housing Advisory Board on any concerns that they have. Have I got that
Yes.
circle of information?
That's a very good summary.
Yes.
But can I just add with a link to the corporate health and safety oversight group as well? So
Yes.
a double level of assurance. So, for instance, if risk and audit wanted to call it in, it would be done via that route.
Right. Okay. So the tenant, if the tenants identify a problem, okay, so that the tenant advisory and grant panel, how do they find out from tenants where they think there's a problem? Or how does the Housing Advisory Board hear from tenants not on that board if there's any problems that they think there may be? Because there isn't the network of TRAs that there were, that you can just, that tenants on those panels can ask of, meet on a regular basis to discuss. So how are tenants not represented on those boards able to feed into that process?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a couple of ways. So tenants, particularly those starting in the high-rise buildings and the 6-storey, have an opportunity through the newsletter, which is hand-delivered to each tenant, to feed any concerns through the fire safety resident engagement team. They have a place on the agenda of the Tenant Advisory and Grants Panel to update any key concerns from tenants, and also to be challenged if there are any things that the Tenant Advisory and Grants Panel think they should respond to. Then the Tenant Advisory and Grants Panel will feed it up to the Building Safety Assurance Board. So that is the current. That doesn't, and I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Smith, it doesn't guarantee we capture everybody. The TRAs can also feed up into TAG. That doesn't guarantee we will capture every tenant, but it does give us a route through which the tenant's voice can be heard at the highest level.
Okay. All right. So I think we're going to have a full discussion on engagement strategy and everything in December. But I think I need to, I certainly, I don't know about anybody else, I need to understand, because you've got a lot of buildings, haven't you? I mean, you're going to have 36 fire champions, so you must have identified 36 buildings where you need input from people at this moment in time. But there are a lot of flats that have communal areas, etc., that need to be compliant at all times. So how are you going to ensure that there's a flow of information? I think that to me that is, and where the role of the housing officer comes in. So I think it's a wider conversation than just your ones that you at the
Yes.
moment.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation that needs to be had as to how that is going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Naz?
Yes, I would say, Chair, that I do agree with you. And, you know, in given that we're putting in the new arrangements and we put them in at the top level, but taking consultation from the best tenant engagement mechanism processes we have currently. But you're right, we do, as we evolve and develop this, you know, and our ambition is to ensure that we amplify the tenant's voice at the highest level possible. So to try and get the greatest level of coverage is probably the aim that we do need to try and articulate back to you. I would say that there are some mechanisms that we may have to retrofit now that we've got the top level governance to make that flow that you're referring to happen. So we may not deliver a fait accompli at that tenant involvement session, but that's a really helpful steer, so thank you.
That's okay. Councillor Pinnock.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back a little bit to the beginning of the report where you talk about the regulator's role and consumer standards. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the decent home standards. And I think the decent home standards.
Yeah.
And you sort of allude to a white paper where there's likely to be a review, and you sort of surmised of what the announcements are likely to be in tackling fuel poverty, disrepair, and achieving high possible health and hygiene standards. I'm just wondering, if those changes do come in, how is that going to impact on Kirklees and on the social housing that we've already got? Do you see that, you know, it's going to result in, you know, a lot of finance or resource that the council is going to have to contend with if these changes do come in and those expectations are there of us?
Well, obviously, we're not 100% sure as to what those changes are at present. Sorry, there's some feedback on the line.
Yeah. Oh, it's gone now.
Oh,
keep going.
Okay. Obviously, we're not 100% sure as to exactly what the changes will be. But as I've tried to allude to, not just in the report, but also in the presentation, we're certainly expecting the Decent Home Standard to be revised and revisited. Now, the Decent Home Standard was fairly, and Naz may have a different opinion, I would say it was a fairly straightforward and in some ways basic standard, which was around component replacement. So, you know, when does your bathroom need replacing after 20 years? When does your kitchen need replacing after 15? When does the boiler need replacing? When does the roof need replacing, etc.? Now, the housing health and safety rating system takes that a considerable way further from the perspective of it brings in lots of the health and safety sort of issues as broad as, for example, just trying to pick some up. So things like damp and mold, which weren't part of the, you know, the standard Decent Home Standard previously. Excess heat or cold, so this brings in those standards around which we're all talking about at the moment, fuel poverty because of the cost of fuel, etc. Radiation, physical environment around lighting and noise, domestic hygiene and pests and pets. So that's, you know, vermin and these kinds of things. So it does extend considerably, and I am certainly anticipating that a number of those will start to be built into that Decent Home Standard, and meeting the Decent Home Standard was part of our requirements for meeting the homes standard that the regulator wanted us to do. So that's the kind of backward retrofitting of events I'm and we are looking at from the point of view of the kind of standards we are likely to need to respond to. Now, some good news is we already knew about those and we know about those and have been working to them for some time anyway. So this will just codify it into the regulatory regime. Will it require additional finance? Possibly. I mean, I wouldn't like to say yes or no at this moment in time, and I'm sure Naz will come in on that. We know that we're obviously committing a lot more resource to the big 6 compliance issues. How much, our plans will have to develop when we're going the low carbon and green agenda, etc. These things are still to be finalised and worked out. But yes, when they're worked out, I'm sure we'll be coming back and talking about the resource envelope that we need to deliver over the next, not just 5 or so years, but literally the 30 years of the HRA business plan.
Okay, Councillor Pinnock, do you want to come back at all on that?
I think Naz wants to come in.
Okay, Naz.
If I may, yes, I would say the Decent Home Standard was very basic. It was very focused on kitchens and bathrooms, which led to an underinvestment in elemental and component parts. So drive in terms of our own new Decent Home Standard, if you will, or the Kirklees standard. So the enhanced lettable standard had, full deck, replace a kitchen if it was about to run out, even if it was 2 years away from replacement, just replace it. New carpets, new floors in bathrooms and kitchens, new blinds. So really quite a high standard, quite an expensive standard, it must be said. And having learned from the pilot, we're now taking a paper through the portfolio holder to ask her where she wants to take it next. In that sense, we are also currently in the light of government's consultation on the Decent Home Standard, so we know something's going to happen because they've consulted us. So in terms of the asset management strategy, we're moving away from the approach that has been adopted thus far to ensuring that we invest in cyclical and life cycle replacement, so that we take a much broader view around asset performance and potential failure. So we're going to create an acute failures program in the 30-year plan. We're about to create a damp work stream in the 30-year plan as well. It will cost more, to answer your question. That said, it's money that we should be spending as an excellent social landlord, which is what we aspire to be. And then on the fuel poverty element, etc., again, we don't need a government or a white paper or a Decent Home Standard to tell us that we need to address fuel poverty. So we've been doing that for many years, but more recently, we've been engaging in government's retrofit program to decarbonise our housing stock. We're engaging with it both for the climate emergency, but also for the affordable warmth benefits that it delivers to our tenants. So we have got a broad approach to it. It's difficult to say which way the Decent Home Standard will go, but there are some things that are a given and that we should just be cracking on with anyway.
Okay. And yes, and the damp work stream, absolutely. That is something that really needs addressing. Can I ask though as well? You're talking about the lettable standards and everything, which is a good thing, but cyclical maintenance. Now, this wasn't just about the environment, fencing, etc. as well. It was also about communal areas and things like that. And so, traditionally, we used to have cyclical maintenance. I think it was about a 5-year program, so you could tell if the gutters were going to be done, if the boards were going to be done, if communal areas needed any work and everything. It was on a programmed cyclical maintenance, and we don't seem to have that. And in relation to housing, health and safety, all of that helped, certainly with the communal areas and the doors, etc., and things like this. This all helped know when these things would happen. So where are we with cyclical maintenance? Is that going to be something that's going to be done, or is it something that you need to actually have different programs of work at this moment in time because of these health and safety issues that we need to address, and then we will look to do cyclical maintenance.
So, Chair, if I may take that question in the that was the point I was making in my previous remark, which is that we currently have post Decent Homes, we adopted a your home, your place approach to managing and maintaining the asset. That meant you go in and spend, as it says, the whole thing. You do the kitchen, you do the bathroom, you do everything. On average spend of about £17,000 per home. But that was done at the expense of a cyclical programme. And so if you're at the back end of that 30-year programme, it's untenable is what I'm saying, Chair. And therefore we are revising. When I say reviewing the asset strategy, I think we've got a pretty good, clear approach, which is we are going to reintroduce cyclical programmes that address things on a life cycle basis, because we use an intelligent approach to our asset management database and stock condition data, plugging that into financial appraisals that enables us to see which are our best performing, etc., both in terms of asset performance and also demand performance. So that as we move through that asset strategy, we've got a better stock and a better stock condition, rather than expecting people to wait until we come around and do the refurbishment program in their home. And when we struggled, we found it challenging with the delivery model we have to deliver your home, your place in the way we thought we might do, which was quick in and out, really happy customers, and move on to the next. It hasn't quite worked like that, and it's at the expense of quite a lot of the existing stock. So we're going to redistribute that on a different model.
I think it is important that we get this, what was the cyclical maintenance, we get that work again, because it does go to health and safety as well.
Absolutely.
And you can tell that the cyclical maintenance hasn't been done. I mean, you can tell, and that's unfair. That's completely unfair for tenants. Okay, I think Councillor Pinnock asked my question actually on that paragraph. I had question marks as well on that paragraph as to what does this mean for people. Are there any other questions that the panel have at this time? No. Councillor Lee Richards.
I just wanted to ask about the climate change and air quality one, because you said that remediation work conforms to current environmental legislation. And sorry, I'm not sure what CDM 2015 is, but in terms of other standards, you're anticipating changes. Are you anticipating, greater environmental standards you're going to have to meet in the social housing? For instance, as we get hotter, drier weather, are houses sufficiently well cooled, or flats sufficiently well cooled for the hot summers?
So in answer to your question, CDM stands for Construction and Design and Management Regulations. The question around whether there is ventilation both ways and cooling and warming both ways, I don't think that I could say safely on heart on hand that our stock conforms to that type of property type. But we are now investing in retrofit. There's a retrofit pilot that's on site currently at Abbey Road in Batley, and we are currently out to a principal designer to design and plan our first passive house scheme as a pilot, alongside, well, we've said at least 20 on a site that probably got the capacity for 100 units plus. And as I've said also, that we're engaged with the government's social housing decarbonisation fund, in the sense that to kind of move that retrofit from pilot to mainstream programme. And on things like Buxton House, for instance, whereby we are in the town centre, we will be doing some remedial works to that as part of the high-rise safety programme. We will certainly explore the feasibility of switching the heating system to ground source heat pumps there, so that it's heat district network ready when that comes online.
Thank you. That answers my
Okay.
question. It was just that we're keeping an eye to the future, and
Yeah.
you know, you're doing it with the other, anticipating what the government's going to do on other things. I also anticipate it on the environmental
Absolutely.
side.
Absolutely.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Right, if there are no more questions, then I think we've mentioned a few items that we would like to have a look at. So no doubt we've got notes of those. Also, we've got some more meetings coming up. Meetings on the next meeting will be on the 10th of November. And if any panel members would like to review the work plan that has been sent out today to panel members, if they feel there's anything that we're missing on there, can you let me know, please? As I'll be having a review of the work plan against the terms of reference in November to make sure that we're absolutely on track with this. I believe some further dates for the new year have been sent out by the officer today. If you could let the officer know what your availability is, that would be very helpful. Okay, thank you ever so much, everybody, for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Have a good evening. Oh,